Welcome to Disruptor Confessions. I'm your host, John Ayers, and today we're joined by Phil Gilbert. He's the force behind IBM's design thinking transformation and now author of the new book, Irresistible Change. Listen, we're going to get into it with Phil. We're going to ask him to unpack why many, if not most, change efforts seem to fail, what leaders sometimes miss, and maybe what's most important, how to spark transformations that people can't resist. Phil, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, John. It's great to be here. And I'm really looking forward to it today because I think this notion of really unpacking the details of how change happens is certainly what I've written about and what I'm passionate about. So looking forward to our conversation.
Unfortunately, we have only an hour. I swear, Phil, we could talk at length about this. It's something very near and dear to me. I kind of want to just jump start real quick with how you landed at IBM. So if I recall, you sold one of your startups to IBM and then found yourself inside one of the world's largest companies.
Yep. Sold the third startup. I was president of Lombardi Software in Austin, Texas. We got bought by IBM in January of 2010. I'd never seen myself working at a company that large. And I made a mental kind of commitment to help my team get through the integration, which we figured would take about a year. And that was kind of the mindset when I showed up.
You're going through this very entrepreneurial mindset, right? All of a sudden you sell to IBM and now you're inside the walls of IBM. Did you ever imagine you would be leading cultural transformation for IBM?
No. Farthest thing from my mind. It never occurred to me that they would countenance that.
Who brought you this challenge?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I just told you I'd made kind of a mental commitment. All my folks at Lombardi, they told me later that they had taken a poll and they assumed that I would be the first one out.
Why is that?
My temperament is not suited. Certainly it wasn't then. My temperament wasn't suited for the processes and the things that are endemic to big companies, which are important for big companies. In order to scale, you have to have processes in place. You need to have systems that reinforce behaviors. That's how a company scales to 400,000 people. But it wasn't my bag. At least I didn't think so. And so I had made this kind of mental commitment. I told my team I'll stay through what IBM calls blue wash. Blue wash is the process of integration at IBM. And it's not just the people side, it's also the technology. Startups are run fast and loose with their technology using open source frameworks and other things that have licenses that large organizations may not want. It takes time to move the product into something that a global company like IBM can stand behind around the world with its customers. So blue wash takes a while. And we thought it would take about a year, and I had made a commitment to help my team through that. Well, I got to IBM, and I got to tell you, from day one, it was like, I can't do this. I mean, we walked into a physical plant that was straight from, I don't know, I felt like it was straight from 1971. It was not built for collaboration. We were using tools that, oh my gosh, I hadn't used since the 90s. And the people and the processes were certainly not customer focused, not empathetic to the needs of their users. Let me just put it that way. So 3 months in, I had it. And I went to a senior vice president named Robert LeBlanc in Armonk, which is IBM's headquarters. And we had dinner, and I said, Robert, the exit was great. I had no doubt that IBM was going to take care of our customers. But I said, I look around, I can't do this. I met with my team before I went out there, and we had figured out a way to get through Blue Wash in a total of 6 months instead of 12. So about 3 more months. And so I told Robert, I said, we're going to get through Blue Wash fast. We're all motivated to do that. And I'm out. And at that dinner, he looked at me and he said, you're looking at this all wrong. He goes, you're looking around the company and you see where we are. You're looking at people and you're saying, I don't fit that mold. You're looking at processes that you don't like. You're looking at outcomes that you don't like. He goes, we don't either. And he goes, we need to change, but we don't necessarily know how. And so you have a vision for where you think we could be. How can you help? And so I didn't buy it for a minute. And I said, well, make me CEO.
You're squeezing 12 months to 6 months just to get out.
Exactly. I said, make me CEO, and laughed. And he goes, well, I can't do that. He said, but what I can do is I'll put you in charge of the unit that bought you. And it was about it wasn't a whole division. It was a little part of IBM. Little at IBM was about 1,200 people. And my company, Lombardi, had about 250. So it was about 5 times bigger than Lombardi. He said, take that unit, and that was the business process management group. Take that unit and make it more like Lombardi and less like IBM. Go. And I thought that was, I thought he was, I'll tell you what I really thought. What I thought was he must have some incentive compensation tied to me staying for another month or two, right? That's what I really thought, because I didn't really think that IBM would put up with what I would do to change that group. But I also, at the same time, I was like, that's a pretty cool opportunity. Like, to all of a sudden have the resources of IBM to truly have a global distribution channel. And even if it's just my product, forget the other 42 products in that division. They had 44 products, most of which competed with one another. It was a mess. There were 1,200 people. Almost all of them were engineers. Very few product managers, zero designers other than what we brought from Lombardi. And so I thought, that's an interesting challenge. I'm going to see if he really will let me do this. And so for the next year and a half, we took that unit, 1,200 people, we took 1,200 to 700. We doubled our market share and grew at about 30% a year, 40% a year in a space that was growing at maybe 5%. And literally, and through that process, I'll just close with this. Through that process, there were many days that I figured I was going to wake up to an email in my inbox saying, stop, enough. Never happened.
When you had that conversation and you're kind of skeptical along the way, what did you see that needed to be changed?
We needed to bring in some new skills. We needed to bring in design, and we need to move to a more iterative approach and a more user-centered based iterative approach to our software development. So bringing in design thinking and Agile to the practices, we had to get the people on board with this. And although the engineering team, for example, felt like they were practicing Agile, the reality was they may have been Agile within the context of their engineering rituals and processes, but it was still waterfall. It was still product management did front stuff, then program management did some stuff, then engineering did some stuff, and finally, at the end of the day, marketing would hear about it, and then sales would have to sell it. There was nothing truly interdisciplinary about the whole go-to-market effort. And so it was a matter of bringing those methods, frameworks into play, and it was bringing new people into the mix, designers and product managers primarily. And then the other thing that really needed to be done in that particular case was we needed to rationalize the product portfolio. We had 44 products, as I said. Virtually all of those products had capabilities and were competing in the marketplace with all the others. And so over the course of that year and a half, the other thing that we did is we took 44 products and we made them 4.
I think it's super interesting because you're touching on some of the things I think a lot of the folks that were in the space at that time were seeing. They were seeing Agile Manifesto. They were seeing Lean. They were coming out of maybe, the 2000 .com bust. They were rethinking human-centered design. You were seeing mobile responsive web, and then you were seeing the launch of like smartphones like iPhones. So this notion was in the market. What I find interesting is you seem to codify it. You seem to make sense of it. I want to move to this notion of change as a product. When I started reading what you were developing for your book, I had to read that line 3 or 4 times, and you reframed change by treating it as a product that people choose to adopt. And I know a lot of people talk about change management and learning and adoption, broadly, but I actually happened to be at IBM at the same time. I joined IBM around 2016. I became certified in enterprise design thinking in great part because of your efforts. So can you break down this notion of change as a product? Can you break down what that means when you think about it in practice?
I guess it's probably instructive to kind of talk about how I came to it, because that's really what, if you understand that, you kind of will get it, I think.
Yep.
So I had been leading the business process management group, this particular group of 1,200. I've just told that story. Yep. I had been leading that. We achieved the results that I talked about, and I was operating in the way I was in kind of my typical startup mode. I was still pretty disruptive. I was breaking things. I had the ability to break things. As I said, I was literally, many times, several things I did, I assumed that was going to be the last straw. Well, that effort started in the spring, early summer of 2010. And at the end of 2011, we had achieved the outcomes that I just talked about. And Jenny Remedi was named CEO. In early 2012, like January, she had a leadership team meeting, and she said to her team, I wasn't there, I wasn't on that team. She said to her team, we have a problem. Our clients don't like our products. They don't like doing business with us. And our employee morale is really rough. What are we going to do? And LeBlanc, who was on her team, said, well, we got this guy in Austin. Why don't you hear his story? And I told Jenny what I just told you. And she said, well, what you did there, can we do it everywhere?
Phil, like this right here is, there's people listening who have companies like your startup, 400 employees or 4,000 or 40,000. IBM's 400,000. So is there, what did you think?
Well, now we get to the product part. I said, well, and I was honest with her. I said, Jenny, I have no idea, but let's give it a go. And so she said, come back with a plan. So that led to a couple of week effort on my part of trying to figure out, well, just tactically, the first thing I wanted to find out was, okay, the typical approach that I've seen, typical at IBM, but I've seen it everywhere. The typical approach would be, we got this crackpot, let's give him 50 people that aren't working on anything anyway, probably because they're scrubs, and see what he or she can do, and nothing will happen. We all know
let them go over and do their thing and let them play. And if something,
and maybe something good will happen.
Yeah. If not, no follow. Yeah.
Right. In this case, because of this particular change, I knew that we needed a significant investment. We needed hundreds, if not thousands, of new people, new skills, not just reskilling, but new people. And so the first thing I had to do was just validate whether they realized the scale of this effort and the investment. And so that took a little bit. Jenny got back to me on that very quickly and said, done, go. And that was when I kind of had the, oh, crap, I'm the dog that caught the bus. Now what? Because I didn't know.
Like the dog that chases the car, you never really thinks about what happens when they catch the tire, yeah.
Yeah, so I had to think about, okay, with the business unit that I led, I was the leader. I could move people out. I could do what I needed to do. And I got to make decisions, and people had to implement them. Well, in this case, this was a whole different kettle of fish. This was 400,000 people. Nobody reported to me, none. And I spent a long time trying to figure out, how do you do that? Because I did not believe in enablement. Let's just get that out. I do not believe in generic training. I don't believe in case studies. I don't believe in the way it's always been done. I believe in adoption. I believe in the adoption of practices to actually generate new outcomes. Because at the end of the day, Jenny didn't know it was design thinking, and she didn't know it was design. She knew about the outcomes. That's what businesses care about. They don't care about all this other stuff. You can call it lean startup, call it design thinking, call it whatever you want to call it. Businesses care about outcomes, and that's what I care about. So I had to think about, how does somebody get 400,000 people to adopt new practices and generate different outcomes? And it came to me that this was the exact problem that startups face with their products. Nobody wants to add a new vendor to their list. And so when a startup comes up with a new product that solves a problem, or that they think it thinks solves a problem, you've got to go out and you've got to get people to adopt it. And they have to adopt it because it is so much better than what they're currently doing. They're willing to pay a new vendor, to adopt a new workflow, to change their life in order to do this thing this better way. And that's what a product is. And that's how a startup thinks about a product. It looks at a marketplace and it says, I've got to get all these people to change. I got to get them all to adopt my product because it's so much better than what they're doing now. They will put up with the discomfort of change.
You're touching on a couple things. So one thing, I recall Jenny, and I don't know if she was the original one who spoke, but she always used to say, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. That line always resonated. I remember we met at Stanford University around the design lab years ago, and he spoke about that. And it always stuck with me, and I still believe in that. And I think it's interesting now, people listening might say, well, yeah, Phil, you won the hearts and minds of the leadership, so you were able to kind of mandate. But you're saying, no, that wasn't going to work regardless. Like
there was no mandate.
You needed to have an adoption path.
Yeah. So just let's be clear for your listeners. There was no mandate. Nobody ever had to join my program. Jenny never mandated it. In fact, and I talk about this in the book, and when I talk about communications, most change efforts really screw up in how they communicate. They use their CEO way too early. Jenny, for the first, I would say she was very supportive to me and to the people in the program, but she didn't say anything publicly for almost 2 years about this effort. We didn't start spending Jenny capital until this effort was pretty much a foregone conclusion. And she was then used and was awesome at helping us scale it out and get the word out, both internally as well as externally.
So Phil, the podcast called Disruptor Confessions, I have kind of observed that there's 3 types of disruption. One, people that are being disrupted. They are, Gen Zs maybe looking for work. They got a graduate degree, but AI is kind of now changing the landscape of the job market. There's also observers of disruption, people that are writing about the impact of disruption or how it's influencing or impacting society or an organization. And then the third one is people that are disrupting the status quo, people that are changing the way things are. I put you in that third category. Would you agree?
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. The reason I wrote the book was there's been a lot written and said about the strategy of change, and it's all good. John Kotter wrote the original, Leading Change. It's fantastic. It's one of my favorite business books of all time. But the actual change, I've seen so many people follow Kotter's advice, and they'll speak in Kotter's language, and they'll say, we did all these things and we still failed. And I felt like they had done them wrong. And so I'm an execution guy. I'm an ops guy at heart. I'm a product guy and an ops guy at heart. And so I wrote the book because I believe there's an operating manual that sits right beside Kotter's book. And that's what I wanted to write.
Well, that's interesting too, because your book Now it's going to come out, I believe, in November. We're recording this a little bit before then. But my understanding is your book is somewhat of a how-to, a tactical principle, kind of like what to do. I think the what, the how, the why, some people might understand what they need to do, maybe even why they need to do it, but you're bringing more of the how. Can we talk a little bit about the how did you do it? Because I think there's a phrase that you use, frozen middle of management. And that opens up a bigger conversation. But can you talk a little bit, or how do you view that frozen middle of management, and what are leaders missing?
I think most change efforts, and the leaders that lead them, I think a lot of times they just do things wrong. They think about the execution incorrectly. And so the book is very pragmatic. It starts out with, I set the stage in chapter 1. Then we talk about branding the program. Again, if it's a product, it needs a brand. It needs to be a premium brand. How do you think about the brand of change? What should you be thinking about when you brand your change program? I talk about forming the leadership team. I talk about which projects should you pick first? How should you think about that? And then I talk about discoveries along the way. And how do you raise the money? So it's a very pragmatic, execution-oriented book that I hope people can get some very specific value out of how to do this correctly at scale and make it stick. The frozen middle was an interesting discovery. I was very biased, and it was probably the single biggest mistake we made. We rectified it later, but I was a big believer in this notion that middle management is resistant of change and irrationally resistant of change. And so I very purposefully designed the program to keep the very senior leadership engaged and informed and helping. So Jenny, and that was basically Jenny, her directs, and their directs. That was a group, very targeted. We had very specific plans for how to keep them engaged. And then the very bottom, the very edge of IBM, the teams that were doing the work, they were our customers. And they were the ones that we were getting to adopt. And I felt like originally my going in approach was we were just going to squeeze out that frozen middle. And ultimately people in the teams would get promoted up, and time would take care of the rest.
So leadership's going to come along. They're going to drive this change. They're going to support the efforts.
The very senior leadership.
The very, very small number out of 400,000, you're talking double digits, maybe. You're not talking thousands.
Yeah.
You're talking small number.
Yep.
And then junior resources that are eager and excited and wanting to try things. But everything in the middle would work itself out through that process.
Yeah, that was my going in assumption.
And then what happened?
Well, about 2 years in, by now we had about 100 teams going, maybe 2.5 years. We had about 100 teams going. So we had a pretty significant data set. Now at IBM, just to put that in perspective, there's no exact count, but we guesstimated that there were somewhere around 4,000 projects or 4,000 teams working on stuff at any given time. So again, a very small sliver, but a pretty healthy number. 100 teams was a lot of people. And I noticed a couple of things. I started looking at the outcomes. We now had a long enough period of time that you could actually start looking at the outcomes that were generated by those teams. And you could start to correlate which teams were performing best, both the behaviors and the tools that they were adopting, and then look at their outcomes. And as you can imagine, with any set of teams, you're going to have a bell curve of performance. On the two edges, you've got the 10% that are just bad, and they were going to be bad. Typically, it was because they had some jerk in the middle of the, screwing things up. But there were other reasons. But you have 10 that are bad. You have 10% that are just fantastic. They're going to be fantastic if you gave them nothing because they're superstar teams. But that 80% in the middle, that's what I was curious about. What of the middle 80%, by and large, they had adopted, or it appeared they had adopted the practices, and they were trying. But there was a wide disparity, or bell curve, if you could draw it. It was very wide disparity of outcomes. And so we assigned two user researchers the problem of, tell me why, of that middle 80, tell me why the 40% that are on the right side of the curve are on the right side of the curve, and the 40% that are on the bad side of the curve are on the bad side. Well, they
Can I
spent
ask
almost...
you, can I ask you at that point where you're kind of doing like an early audit? These teams are working on what, Phil? They're doing transformation, they're doing technology, they're doing product build. Is it all across the map in terms of what they're working on?
Yeah. By that time, we had teams in virtually every division. So many were products. Several were HR initiatives. So their users would have been the employees. Some were in finance. So their users were the senior management reporting systems. Some were in sales. So how were we applying these practices how were we applying design thinking and design to help us in our sales cycles? It was literally all over the map, all
So
sorts of projects.
Phil, here's something. If someone's listening and they've got a company of 400, 4,000, 40,000, they're probably thinking, well, I've got all these different divisions. You're looking at it at a crazy scale. Now you're seeing the edges, the 10% and the top 10%. You're looking at this 80% in the middle, but there's a common theme you're starting to see regardless of the type of team. Tell me about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So they came back. We spent about a year. I mean, it was a very exhaustive research effort. And they came back and they said, we found two things. The first thing that we found is that the great teams have this person, and that they're weird because all of the great teams have this person on the team that is performing extraordinary tasks with respect to the practices. So, for example, it might be if they're an extrovert, it might have been a person that said, hey, we're stuck right here. Let's get out of this room. Let's go to a whiteboard and let's brainstorm. Somebody that pulls the team together like that. If they're an introvert, they may do it not quite as grandly as that, but they're still doing this thing. And they called these people magic people because they couldn't really identify the heuristic that was common. All these teams that were great had this person. And the teams that weren't so great didn't really have that. Well, about the same time, a book called The Captain Class came out. Long story short, a guy named Sam Walker wrote a book, and the book answers the question of what made the 10 greatest sports teams of all time, the 10 greatest sports teams of all time. And what Sam found was it was not the superstar player. It was not the coach, the manager. It was the team captain. It was the person that behind the scenes held his teammates or her teammates accountable in the locker room, on the pitch, on the court. That was the same thing. These were the magic people. So that was the first finding. And we did a lot of stuff around cultivating magic people. The second finding really hit me. And they said, the best performing teams have somebody in their line management who is protecting them from the stupid decisions that rain down on them all the time in a big company. And anybody who's in a company of more than 100 people know that the disruption caused by the project teams doing work, by the random comments coming from above, that just throws them off. And they said, there's so much random crap flowing down onto our teams that if a team has even a single shit umbrella, they're going to do better work. I got to tell you, that really struck me, because what that meant was my prejudice against the frozen middle, and the design of the program that ignored them and assumed we would squeeze them out was wrong. Now, here's the real interesting thing. Most change programs, and of course, we educated our people on the design thinking practices, including middle management. We did that from the beginning. But here's what they found. And the problem and the mistake that most change programs make with middle management is they teach them the thing. But that's not what they needed. What their problem was is now all of a sudden they had all of their old teams that were still working in the old ways, because it takes time for these transformation efforts to get to everybody. And they have these new teams that are working in new ways. They're generating new types of artifacts. They're speaking a new language, and they're giving their progress report updates in new ways that don't fit the management systems that the middle managers have to report through. It was literally the translation of where these teams were didn't fit into the management systems and the reporting systems that they had to be accountable for, and oftentimes that their pay was dependent on. We realized that in order to engage middle management, it wasn't about teaching them the thing. It's about teaching them how to manage the thing. Once we did that, and it only took us once we had the insight, it actually only took us about 30 or 40 days to figure out how to do that.
Did you reveal those reported findings openly, transparently, or no?
Oh, yeah. We created a badge. We had to change the name. We called them advocates. But we created a digital badge, and we created a training program. And we did immediately then say, okay, for every team, we branded our program the Hallmark program. For every team in the Hallmark program, your line managers all the way up to Jenny, and by the way, she brought her team in for the first class. The line managers all the way up to Jenny have to get their advocate badge within 90 days of you coming into the program. That changed everything.
Phil, it's been some time since I was at IBM, but I was there between 2015 and 2020, 21. But I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, the design thinking badges, I believe there were 4 or 5 levels. I got deep into it. I became certified, I think, up to level 3 or 4. I was a big fan. I was kind of an adopter, if you will, kind of my nature. Maybe I'm one of those kind of quirky guys that doesn't always color inside the lines. But listen, like, there's a lot that probably didn't stand in the front of the line, probably naysayers. Can you talk a little bit about that?
If you didn't want in, don't come in. The fact of the matter is that we started, and I talk about this in the book about how do you select teams. Most people put together tiger teams. They put together special teams, innovation teams. That's completely wrong. Change needs to happen in the business. And so you pick mainline teams that are working on stuff that's important. And for your first teams, you pick the ones that want to change. They're willing to buy into it. And all the way through the program, with 400,000 people out there and some 4,000 teams, the demand, if people want your product, the demand is always going to be greater than what you can give. So why would you work with people that don't want to come in? So there was never, as I said a couple of times, it wasn't mandated. Our first year, we worked with 7 teams. And by the third quarter, just based on their testimonials, and that's how we told the story of the program. I didn't go around evangelizing the program. We filmed the people that were in the program, and we let them tell their stories and how they were being impacted by the change. And that's what we put out on the company intranet. And so by the third quarter of the first year, just through their stories, we had more demand for year 2 than we could possibly handle. Those were teams that wanted to come in and change. In year 2, we had more demand for year 3 than we could possibly handle. So we grew from 7 teams to about 25 the second year. And in the third year, we grew to about 100, 125. And in the fourth year, we went from 125 to somewhere north of 300 or 400. And by then, we pretty much stopped counting, and it just was kind of started the way that people work. We dealt with naysayers by not dealing with them.
Phil, I know we're talking more specifically about IBM as patient zero, if you will,
Yeah.
At scale. But taking IBM out of it, these principles hold. So can I ask you, what would be a number one reason you would point to that transformations like this succeed?
I'm obviously biased, but I think if you have this product mindset and when you adopt this product mindset, what it really means is that if you can't get people to adopt your product, the change that you desire, there's only 2 possible reasons for that. I've been in business for 45 years, 50 years maybe. I've never met anybody that wanted to come to work and work more hours than they had to. I've never met anybody that wanted to come to work and do a crappy job. Never. And yet people deliver crappy outcomes all the time. They know it. They want to do better. And so you are proposing something to help people generate better outcomes and make work easier for them. If they don't adopt it, there's only two possible reasons. One is you're wrong. Your product is not better than their existing product or whatever they do. Or number two, it could be better, but you haven't cracked the nut yet. And you own that. That's on you. It's not on the person. How many times have you heard, oh, well, they just don't get it? I don't buy that. In fact, that statement was forbidden to be uttered by my leadership team. They don't get it. If they didn't get it, that was our fault. And that's what this product mindset really puts in place. And why transformation efforts succeed? It's because the leadership owned the failures, iterated through them, and figured out, okay, that's on me. It's like when we discovered this issue about middle management. That was our fault. We owned it and we adapted.
What I find else alongside that is just like a product, you can't sell it if it doesn't have a brand. You need to name what it is.
Yeah.
Am I buying a bicycle or a car? And I think that extension of a product mindset takes me to what's the brand?
What's the brand?
What's the tone, personality of this vision?
Exactly. And it needs to be bigger than the thing. You know, so many efforts, it's like we're doing an agile transformation. Let me tell you what, with a capital A, or we're doing a design thinking transformation. How many of those have I seen come and go? Our brand was Hallmark. Now, as you think about branding, to your point, and you know this better than I do, but a brand isn't the object. A brand is something different. A brand has values. And a brand is big enough that whatever needs to go around the object can go around the object. So, you know, us talking about design thinking was actually, I mean, to be honest with you, the implementation of design thinking was 5% of what my team did. The other 95% was what tools around these teams are prohibiting design thinking from flourishing? What attitudes, what methods, what processes, what HR systems around these teams are impacting their ability to do what they do? We had some HR systems that absolutely were agnostic, if not even maybe even detrimental to the notion of true interdisciplinary teaming. So we had to go replumb the HR systems and the career ladders for various professions. You know, those values, all of that is part of Hallmark. And so if you asked around IBM, outside of the people that were in the program, if you asked outside of that group within IBM, they may or may not know design thinking, but they knew that these Hallmark teams were generating differentiated outcomes. And so Hallmark became a very desirable thing to be a part of. And it was way more than just design and design thinking.
I think it's super interesting that you took it to a book, Irresistible Change, this notion of IBM, 110, 120-year-old company. They're embedded in almost every fabric of our lives across the globe. You know, technology, process, the ways to do business. So you did it you didn't start small, Phil, with this idea of I'm going to disrupt a small little company and see how it goes. I guess you were asked to do it, but like to me, that's quite remarkable. And I kind of want to say something about that in the context of today's landscape. So we now are living in a completely different time. I think you and I have talked a little bit about in preparing for this call, the return to office, return to work was super disruptive coming out of COVID and, you know, all of the things that we saw in that. We're now seeing AI as a massive disruption. So I think today's workforce is just different than the past. And those who think Big Blue and IBM is just this old behemoth, they're kind of looking at this very small startup We're just in a new wave. We have a restless workforce. We have an artificial intelligence mindset. Where do you think leaders today are blowing it when it comes to change in today's landscape?
They're blowing it the same way that they've blown it for the last 50 years. They're leading with the tech. They're leading with the tech. And change is about people. It's about the values of your change program. And it's about how you understand all of the systems and the processes and the practices that are prohibiting the new behaviors, one of which is the adoption of a new technology, that are prohibiting those behaviors from flourishing and sticking for a long time. They're just treating it as go start using AI in your job. And I will tell you, we're in a time where change is happening all the time. Change is going to happen. AI is going to impact us. The question for the best companies is how can I accelerate the benefits I can get from AI into generating better outcomes for my customers? And so this notion of, AI efforts are failing, and we've now seen a second report. The first one came out of MIT several weeks ago that said 90 some percent of the initiatives are failing. So again, we are leading with the tech, and what isn't changing, even as the processes and the practices are changing all the time underneath us. What doesn't change is that businesses don't care about any of that crap. They care about outcomes.
Outcomes. And I just saw a report yesterday, actually, McKinsey came out with about this kind of notion of AI adoption. And basically the process is critically important. How do agents or people work together? How is this collaboration from technology to people? Which I think is just another way to look at what you've been
It totally is.
implementing and productizing and codifying. They're seeing that those who dive into what I'm calling an agent persona or agent service blueprint are really the ones who are starting to see things stick because you have that adoption organically in the roles that people may be doing now.
It's the interdisciplinary teaming. How does the use of this new thing impact your team's outcomes? And that's missing. People are not doing that. They're just saying, go use AI. It's still very individual, and they're holding training sessions with individuals on AI. Individuals don't do anything for companies. Teams do. No outcome enters the marketplace and is successful because of one individual. Individuals have influence, but this notion of using teams one of the principles of this idea is that I write about is that teams are the atomic unit of change, not individuals. And those teams always have to be worked with in the context of their problem. There's no generic training. We never generically trained anything at IBM. Every team, when they entered the program, there was a protocol, and it was kind of a 1 week protocol where they worked with these new practices for 1 week on their project with their teammates. And if by Friday of that week, they didn't see material advancement way above what they would have gotten, they could leave the program and never hear from me again. Nobody ever did, but that was the promise. They had agency, but it was the team that we focused on, and it was their outcome that had to be impacted. And I think that's missing from, quite frankly, virtually every AI transformation effort I've seen.
Phil, there's so many buzzwords, right? People just adopt these buzzwords. It's human-centered, it's experiential. For leaders who are listening and feel stuck, what is the first move you would tell someone? What move should they start with to make change irresistible?
Well, I'll tell you the first question I always ask. When I'm asked by a CEO, we've been doing this thing, we've been trying it, we started 2 years ago, we haven't got traction. The stories are always the same. We've tried this, we did quick wins, they all won, it was all great, but it's not sticking. The first question I ask is, tell me about the teams that have adopted it. And in virtually every case, the teams were, they have different names, tiger teams, innovation teams, but they have a common trait. we brought together all these great people from across the business and we put them on this project that I've always wanted to have done, and they killed it. They crushed it. I said, well, what happened to those team people after that project? And invariably they say, oh, well, they went back to their old thing. And it's like, yeah, you had part-timers. It wasn't a real project. It wasn't really in the business. And they were able to operate in a bubble. And whatever they delivered, maybe that thing stuck, but certainly they didn't really practice it in the context of their real world jobs. So that's where I would start, is to start thinking about the change with mainstream teams in your business. No changes. Take teams, they need to be led by people, and they need to have team members that are wanting to change. But that's where I would start. What projects? You kind of also have to go, then what's my leadership team for change and what have you? But that's always the first question I ask is, how did you think about your first projects?
Is it always from executives? Is it always leadership, top down? What role should employees play in shaping change and transformation?
Well, the employees are the ones that, ultimately have to be impacted by it. They're the key. But, the role of those folks, in my opinion, is not only are they the people on the team that you're working with to adopt the practices, but they're the ones who need to tell the stories to their peers about how this is impacting their lives. I'm not a believer in a bunch of evangelism. I didn't go around to the masses at IBM. Certainly at the very top, at the very beginning, they say, well, what kind of ROI is there? But I didn't go around all the time saying, oh, design thinking is the greatest thing on earth, and companies with design thinking have higher stock prices. I didn't do any of that. We had the people in the program telling their stories. The role of the employee in change, they're your ambassadors. So they're the ones undergoing change. They have to bring that mindset and that positivity to their work, and they have to work with you through the processes and the people that are going to be in their way, and then they need to tell their stories.
Is it inevitable it's going to happen or no?
No, it's not inevitable.
So
we
talk about that.
We could talk for days on my view of free software, and anything free. Nothing free is valued. And so, one of the things that we adopted from day one, the first year, because nobody knew anything, we paid the way. If those first 7 teams, if there was ever travel, or if there was ever, and there was travel and getting them together and the expense of the coaches on my side, we paid for all that. The company wrote one big check that first year. Wasn't big in the IBM sense, but it was one check.
Going back to the earlier part of our conversation, what was the feeling at that time? Did you think failure was an option for you?
Well, it's always an option. In terms of it may happen. I didn't really, it's not fair to say I didn't care. I cared deeply. But if it failed, I was willing to deal with that. While we paid the teams first, the program was built on this premise. That after the first year, the teams were going to pay their way. So we were going to charge money. This product wasn't going to be free. So again, it all stems from viewing this thing as a product. If you have a product that's good enough, people will pay for it. And so starting in year 2, every team that came into the program to be changed paid for the privilege to be changed. And that was the point at which we would know whether we had success or failure. If that demand that was starting to generate in the third quarter of the first year, all that demand coming in, we started telling these teams, we knew what it was going to cost, and that's all detailed in the book. You can learn about how we thought about the price and what the price was, and when the one-time fee turned to a subscription fee, all that's in the book. I won't bore you with that right here, but if January of year 2, nobody would pay, if nobody fought the battle of their fall plan the previous year to get the money to pay to be in this program, we were out of business. You
felt strongly about it, though.
Oh, absolutely. If you don't have teams pay the freight, if the business doesn't pay for change, they ain't going to change.
So this is where your book, it's practical. It's specific, right?
Yep.
It's a little bit of a not a what and a why. It's also the how, as I mentioned earlier. Is it not?
Yeah, I tried. I tried to document. It's kind of written in a memoir style. I tried to document every significant decision I made, right down to the conversations that Robert and I had about how much to charge these teams. What was our business model? And the first year business model, to put it in technology terms or SaaS terms, the first year business model was freemium. Let's just get some people in the door. The second year's business model was one-time permanent license. And then we switched to essentially a subscription model where they're still paying today.
That's the product. I mean, there you go. There's the product mindset kind of being realized in real time.
Yeah.
Kind of want to move into just some quick fire bold predictions from Phil. What would you say is a bold prediction about the future of how organizations are going to handle change going forward?
I think this notion of building an ongoing capability to rewire their culture fast enough to adopt this new tech in a way that generates new outcomes, I think this is going to have to become an institutional thing. And it is not your learning and knowledge organization generating new classes. That's what it is not. It looks more like, I believe, and there may be other successful iterations, but I doubt it. But it's probably going to look like a product team. And it's going to be a product team that is got, as I talk about in the book, the way I conceptualize the architecture of my leadership team, because I had the notion of a virus in my mind. We had to protect and we had to communicate the virus, the content of the Hallmark program, to all of the teams doing it. But at the same time, we had to have the capsid shell around it that interfaced with the large scalable systems of the company to take the learnings from the genome and infect those systems. So for example, I had a person on my leadership team that was my talent and HR leader. Now, certainly that person was working with the teams in the program, but their more strategic role and their more important role was interfacing with the corporate HR team so that as we ran into problems with HR systems that didn't work in the new world, we could make those changes. We did the same thing with the CFO office for funding and for getting the money that paid, as I talked about charging. We did the same thing with the CIO who owned tools. So as we ran into tools that didn't support the interdisciplinary teaming that we needed, and we needed to pilot new tools in the program, well, I had a person that was responsible for, okay, we're piloting this tool. It does work. Now we need an enterprise license. That's a big deal. That's hard to do. So that capability of swapping in the tactical change, what I call the change provocation. IBM needed design thinking in 2013. Companies today need AI. That's the change provocation. But the team around that delivers it, that thing is going to be, I believe, in companies that really figure out how to change as a core competency. They're going to have this product team, this change team in place permanently.
I do think AI is different. I think it's wider and deeper than we've seen in past. But I love the conversation around this notion of what you've been studying and kind of implementing and sharing with us today and now documenting in your book. It seems like these are foundational principles still. Even though AI is going to change the way we do things, how we work, it seems like there's some foundational principles. One, do you agree? And two, if leaders are listening or reading your book, are they overhyping or underestimating the world around them?
I don't know. I think they're underestimating the effort that it will take to get new outcomes if you think about the only thing in the recent past that we can even equate, and I think AI is going to have a more fundamental impact even than it, but if you, well, I don't know if it's going to be more fundamental than the internet, but if you look at the internet and certainly e-commerce that sprung up around it from the 90s to today, that was a massive tool. But the companies that have, I think, reaped the vast benefits from how they did it are very few. I mean, the change, let's take e-commerce, the internet. The change of e-commerce, the internet, it's affected everybody. But if you look at the way, for example, Bezos directed Amazon to use it, was directly led to the creation of AWS and massive fortunes and benefits, both economically to individuals, but also to society as a whole, the whole cloud thing. So it will matter, I think, how people think about inserting and using AI in their business so that it becomes leveraged. And it's always the companies, in my opinion, that are going to win in AI are going to be the same kinds of companies that won with the internet and e-commerce and that won with, I don't know, industrialization to begin with. It's going to be the ones that don't think AI first, they think customer first. And how can this AI help me generate outcomes for my customers?
I love that. As we wrap up, I kind of feel the same thing, that what you're talking about is, change not for change's sake, but to deliver outcomes, to deliver value to the business. And the way to adopt it is to make it so great that people want to use it. I'm hearing also, Phil, that there's human behavior that's happening around change as part of this. Did you speak of that directly, or was that kind of never spoken about, but you knew it was occurring?
Oh, no, I talk about it very directly. In fact, we started tracking, IBM's tracked employee engagement scoring for a long time. One of the things that I'm really proudest of in terms of the things that we achieved is the employee engagement really went up to some of its highest levels ever under Jenny. And I think the change program was a big part of that, because again, our transformation program, when I was first working on it, of course, the product mentality, but one of the senior vice presidents at the time, actually, he said, "What's your formula? Like, how are you going to replicate this? How are we going to know?" Because in the early days, we've talked about it ad nauseum today, 400,000 people, you're only going to impact a few in the first year, et cetera. How are we going to monitor it? You need a formula to scale anything. And I really hadn't thought about it like that. And I started thinking about, I talk about the whole process in the book, but to make a long story short, I started thinking about how anthropologists understand cultures and came up with this, because I very much believe it's a culture that generates outcomes. Culture equals outcomes. And so how do you unpack culture? And I came up with this formula of people. It's the people that we look at, their size, their, et cetera. It's their practices. What did they eat? How did they do business? What did they work? And it's their habitats. It's their places. So we had this formula that said people plus practices plus places equals culture. Culture equals outcomes. Therefore, people plus practices plus places equals outcomes. And I felt like every one of those has to change in any transformation effort. And so for my leadership team, every single one on my team, their 6-month goals, everyone had to have a people goal, a places goal, and a practices goal. Something about that had to change and support this broader cultural transformation. And as a result of focusing on all those things, making our places, and by the way, virtual and in real world, by making all of those things better all the time, employee engagement went through the roof. And that's one of the things I'm proudest of being a part of.
I love that. I mean, we can end on that note. I was going to ask you where you found your greatest value in implementing this at this scale and coming back to that engagement. human experience, it's really where you want to get it, because and actually your subtitle, it's Irresistible Change, a blueprint for earning buy-in and breakout success. I mean, earning is not a throwaway word there. Earning your trust, earning that engagement. Phil, like I said, we've been on over an hour. I feel like we just scratched the surface. Any parting words you want to share before we drop?
Sure, buy the book. In fact, buy two of them. You need one for work, one for home.
So the book is Irresistible Change, a blueprint for earning buy-in and breakout success. They can get it at Gilbert.com. I believe it's out in November.
Yeah, it's available for pre-order, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, globally. I think most countries around the world are going to get it. It'll be in English, but yeah, so just you can go to Gilbert.com and see where, but you can also just go to your favorite bookseller, and it should be available for pre-order now. And I think it's different. It's not a strategy book. I spend 2 seconds on the strategy, and I spend the whole book on the how. And so I think it's a different kind of perspective.
Well, I love it, and thank you. I think the big thing for me, anybody listening, especially whether you're junior resource, middle management, or senior executives trying to figure out how to crack the code, to me, it just sounds like it's a practical approach. It's tactical, and it's founded on one of the largest companies, one of the most incredible companies ever, IBM. So to do it at that scale, I think it's just a great blueprint for folks to dig into. Phil, I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
You bet.
We look forward to all reading the book.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks again.